Now he's going to jump into his review of the various proofs that he wants to attempt to defeat, right? Here he says, okay, now throughout history, 11 major kinds of evidences or proofs have been offered for the existence of God. Okay, so just 11? I mean, come on, really? But anyway, that's where he starts off with, right? And so he wants to deal with these. If these 11 proofs do not work out logically, he tells us, or lead to logical self-contradictions, then we can only say that God's existence is not proved. Well, we can say that God's existence is not proved by these 11. Right? That's probably the most we can say, right? And so he goes on to say, we can say that God's existence is not proved, it's unproven, not disproven, as he mentioned before. So it's not, and again, he's making this distinction. He's not trying to say that God doesn't exist. He's just trying to say that the existence of God is unproven by these 11 arguments. All right. So he says you cannot prove that something, does not exist. And he understands that. That's why he makes the bar low. Right? You can't prove a negative, right? And that's why he mentioned before, he tells us the definition of an atheist is not someone who thinks he has proven that God does not exist, because you can't do that. All right. So there he goes. That's how. So he's going to jump into these various 11 proofs, and he's going to try to show that they don't work, right? That they don't prove God's existence.
And as we're going through this episode and probably next episode, just put yourself into the mindset of remembering what happened that Bonson was presenting in his opening statement, and see if any of these things tend to match up, and whether or not Stein understands who he's talking to and what his opponent is, or if he's just bloviating here. Well, the first one he's going to tackle is the cosmological argument. Probably well known to us, the first cause, the first mover, the Kalam argument. This tends to be kind of in the tool belt very quickly for the classical apologist. And so he says that the first cause argument, also called the cosmological argument, says that everything must have a cause. Therefore, the universe had a cause, and that cause is God. God was the first or uncaused cause. Right, so all things that exist, I'm putting his own spin on this, had a cause. The universe exists, therefore the universe had a cause. Who was that causer? It was God, and so now he's going to attack it, and so he's going to have a problem with this. Okay, so this leads us to a real logical bind, he says, for the theist, because everything must have had a cause, right? Everything. Well, then God must have had a cause. Well, and if God had a cause, then he was not the first or uncaused cause. If God did not have a cause, then not everything must have a cause. If not everything needs a cause, then perhaps the universe is one of those things which doesn't need a cause. So there's kind of two levels of argumentation here. So the first one being is that the idea that if all things had a cause that caused things, then God himself must be caused by something. You're going to want to stop here, right? You're going to want to throw your flag on the play and say that's not the type of God that's existed within the confines of the historicity of the New Testament church, Scripture, the Old Testament, so all those things.
And again, this gets back to his definition of God, right?
Exactly.
This broad definition, then he can use this type of thing to help, criticize the existence of God.
Right.
But if you have a different definition of God, this argument doesn't work, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, okay, well then what about Zeus? Zeus doesn't fit this definition, but he has to argue against Zeus. So this cosmological argument doesn't fit either. Or I guess it's not Zeus, it's his father. But regardless of the fact that there seems to be a movement here which is arguing for a type of God that isn't believed, and we'd want to stop this. And again, just imagine yourself in Bonson's position and seeing what his responses will be to these things. Okay, so what he summarizes here is that so if God can be a caused being that causes the universe, well then maybe the universe is one of those things which also doesn't need a cause as well. So he's saying essentially that if your God is also caused logically, if you want to take this form of argumentation, then the universe is caused. And if he's not caused, well, then maybe the universe is also uncaused. And so you've got yourself, he says, into a logic bind there, and that proof basically fails, as if to shirk off this thing as completely finito and done with, even though we'd want to argue with a few of the premises here.
All right.